I'm going to take you back in time, to a period before the number 9. To a period before rabbits and dogs were given loaded firearms. To a period where dinosaurs still roam the earth? Well, no, if you're saying that, you've definitely gone too far. But where we're taking you will be a time long before three-headed monkeys and rubber chickens with pulleys in the middle. I'm taking you back to Maniac Mansion. For those well versed in Lucasfilm games or LucasArts, they'll know that for many people, they've come to view them as one of the leading adventure game developers towards the end of the 20th century, competing with its rival Sierra. I've made a few jokes detailing the differences between Sierra and LucasArts, namely the key differences in ideologies between the companies in rewarding players with exploration. In many LucasArts games, exploration is free at the player's whim. Sierra, however, woke up choosing violence, and if you even looked in the wrong place, you were dead. Gone. Zilcho. Deed. The differences were often mocked between the rival companies and their games. In Sierra, you're likely to die. In LucasArts adventure games, you won't. That's one of the universal truths that you have come to accept once you've delved into enough 90s adventure games. But this was not always the case, especially in older titles by the company. For example, in LucasArts' second adventure game, Maniac Mansion. And boy, let me tell you, the most maniacal thing about this mansion is that this is a LucasArts game where the player can not only die, but wind up in many dead man walking scenarios. But alas, this was the old west days of adventure gaming, and long before Ron Gilbert abstained from a lifestyle of violence, murder, and revenge, becoming the sweet, gentle, nourishing father of video games we've come to love and accept. And I'm not just saying that to prevent Ron from murdering me callously. Where would you get a ridiculous idea like that? Please don't hurt me, Ron. But for its devious ploys and attempts to hinder the player from progressing, Maniac Mansion was also rather interesting in that it actually encouraged different forms of play in the game. How? Well, Maniac Mansion generously provided different protagonists to play as. There are 7 playable characters in the game: Sandy's boyfriend Dave, and his friends Bernard, Jeff, Michael, Razor, Sid, and Wendy. Or at least I say friends, they don't seem too broken up when he dies. Due to the open nature of choosing characters to accompany Dave, there are multiple different ways for the players to play through the game, with each additional character having their own skill, excluding Dave, who is pretty much useless in every sense of the word. But we're stuck with him. Accompanying Dave, we have Bernard, the certified dweeb of the group, who is able to repair items that can be used to win the game. Razor and Sid are both similar in that they are both musicians and therefore they can solve puzzles that involve using music. Michael, meanwhile, is a photographer who can use his skills to help win the game, and Wendy is a novelist who uses sheer clickety-clackety keyboard warrior skills to win the day. And then there's Jeff. Jeff can repair a phone. We don't care about Jeff. So let's take a look at the composition I chose to explore Maniac Mansion for the first time. Now, alongside Dave, I chose to bring along both Bernard and the Razor. Bernard because it feels appropriate with him since he is one of the main protagonists of the 1993 sequel, Day of the Tentacle, and because I feel every 80s media like this needs the dynamic between the cool guy main protagonist and the dweeb. And I chose Razor because, I don't know, she seems cool. Now, I do need to clarify as well that there are two versions that I played of the game. Both were available through Steam, which was the standard and enhanced versions. I obviously went with enhanced to get those jaw-dropping 4K shots. But there is a reason why I had to go back to the original standard version, which I'll explain later. The game begins with Dave and his chosen two kids arriving at the mansion, where Sandy has been kidnapped by the mansion's owner, Dr. Fred, determined to break in and rescue her, starting the game. The game utilises the Scum Engine, one of the most prominent video game engines for LucasArts games, which utilise verbs for the player to select to interact with environments. In fact, Scum was created for Maniac Mansion itself and actually stands for Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion. And the use of the engine would later be implemented into future titles such as The Secret of Monkey Island. The player selects one of the verbs and uses it to interact with the environment, which is the main basis of the game. Aside from this, the player can also select a new kid to play with by selecting the new kid option and choosing the appropriate character. Now, flipping through these different characters is incredibly important, as the game is not possible to complete without doing so, alongside trading items between each character to make sure they're all prepared to face off against the dangers of the mansion. And there are many detriments to be found in Maniac Mansion, with the first being Dr. Fred's wife Edna, who the player can immediately stumble across in the kitchen. Now, if the player's fast enough, they can run out the kitchen and Edna will give up, possibly due to crippling arthritis or slipping on the haphazardly left cranberry juice all over the kitchen. We don't know, it's never really explained, but what I do know is that you should get a cleaner, ma'am. However, if the player has the dexterity stats of a heavy armoured orc in a D&D game, then the kid is caught and locked away in the mansion's dungeons. But fear ye not, as this isn't strictly the end. If two kids are locked away in the dungeon, there's actually a loose brick for the player to push, although it's only possible to escape using only one kid through this method. And if the player is fortunate enough to snag the key to the dungeon, then they can essentially come and go as they like. However, not all the game is as kind as this. There are many different ways to lose in Maniac Mansion, which is a far departure from the player-friendly approach found in later LucasArts games. There are some moments where one of the kids will be put into mortal peril, and if the player isn't careful, they will die, with Dr. Fred being kind enough to give them their own grave outside of his house. Death is not necessarily a game breaker if the player still has everything they need to complete the game. For example, if Jeff or Dave have died, but have given all their items to another character, you should still be able to complete the game by using one of the non-useless characters of Maniac Mansion. But sometimes you might have just screwed yourself into a dead man walking scenario. If you're more versed with LucasArts games over Sierra, then you might not be as familiar with dead man walking scenarios, so let me explain. A dead man scenario is where the game still continues as normal, but it is unwinnable. The player can still keep meandering around the area, but at this stage it is strictly pointless and they'll likely need to reload to a previous game, or God forbid, restart the entire game again. And sometimes it's not even obvious that the player has screwed up. For example, if the player uses the paint remover anywhere but the plant room where there's a hidden door behind paint, then they have messed up and they can't complete the game, and they likely wouldn't even know it. It's harsh, and it's something that adventure games started to drift away from more. If a character dies with an important item on them, then that item is gone for good, and so are your chances of safely finishing the game. However, it's also worth noting that some specific characters dying are much worse than others, and that all boils down to the player's composition of kids to play as. Every other kid has their own special ability, with exception to Dave himself, and to an extent, Jeff. In fact, if the players choose Jeff and another character, but then that other character dies, then the player won't be able to complete the game. And let me explain why. Towards the end of the game, the player encounters a purple tentacle guarding the secret lab, and there are several ways to get by him, but these are limited to using one of the kids' special abilities. Since Jeff and Dave don't have any useful abilities, they are no use against the tentacle and instead need to rely on their friends to do this for them, which splits off different paths the player can take. For Bernard, his special ability is fixing a radio and having some goddamn sense by calling the police, who happen to be the Meteor Police, who come to arrest the source of Dr. Fred's madness, a meteor. Dropping his badge, the player can pick up this to pass by Purple Tentacle into Dr. Fred's secret lab. The other possibility for avoiding Purple Tentacle is by befriending the way more friendly Green Tentacle, a struggling musician. Only Sid or Razor can do this, however, as they need to create a tape of their music to give to the Green Tentacle. In response, GT shares his own music with them, which the player can then send off to an address they learned of a publisher, who in turn sends them a contract. However, this also includes one of the most devious puzzles in the game: opening an envelope without ripping it. Yep, if you open the envelope from the safe hastily, then you'll ruin the envelope, and it's required in order to send off GT's music, meaning, oh man, you guessed it, another dead end. The solution is to instead get a jar of water and place both this and the unopened envelope in the microwave to generate enough steam to easily open up the envelope to use later. It's incredibly devious, and difficult to believe that such a concept came from the Ron Meister himself. With the contract given to GT, he becomes very eager to help protect the kid, and chases off PT when he tries to stop them from entering the secret lab. But say that you've chosen Michael and Jeff, how on earth would you pass by PT? Well, by instead enlisting the aid of Dr. Fred's son, Weird Ed. To do this, the player needs to ensure that they stole Weird Ed's parcel before he can get it, or it's another dreadful dead end. If he then gives Ed the parcel, then Ed suddenly becomes BFFs with them and shares with them their intent to rescue their father from the control of the purple meteor. For whatever reason, undeveloped film randomly shows up outside the house after this, and the player takes it to a dark room. If the player doesn't open the film when the lights are off, then the film becomes unusable because, hey motherfucker, you just stumbled into another dead end. However, if the player safely does this and uses some developer, they'll get the plans needed to recruit Ed onto their side, who chases off PT. The final alternative way to get by PT is by simply appealing to the egotistical nature of the purple meteor itself by using Wendy's writing skills on the meteor's manuscript, and following a similar amount of steps to Razor and Sid's scenario, sending off the manuscript to the publisher and getting a contract. With this, PT immediately realises how happy the meteor will be and lets the player pass. Once passed, there are several ways that the player can deal with the meteor. If the player took Bernard's path, then that's pretty much handled for the player by the Meteor Police, and all we need to do is turn off the self-destruct button to win the game. Likewise, if the player goes for Wendy's route, all they need to do is put on a nearby radiation suit to prevent them from being murdered by the meteor's ray, get into the room, and give them the contract to win the game. However, if the player doesn't have either Bernard or Wendy, then instead they'll need to use one of the other kids to pick up the meteor and take it to a car in the garage, put it into a trunk, and start the car to launch it into space. Now, if the player has already launched the car into space, then I've got 2 words for you, my friend: dead end. Or is that one word with a hyphen? Regardless, you're fucked. With the amount of times I mentioned the term dead end, you'll probably realise how unforgiving, callous and outright difficult it would be to complete the game without a guide. But I also want to point out that the first version of the game that I played, which was the Steam's enhanced version, could arguably be considered the easy version as well. And why is that, you might ask? Well, because for some reason, some of the puzzles in the Steam re-release don't work properly, as the code itself seems to have been altered, meaning that if the player inputs any prompts during code sections, the player immediately decides, fuck it, close enough, and proceeds, eliminating a lot of the challenge. Now, at first I thought I was some sort of idiot savant when it came to guessing numbers, but the harsh reality is that no, the game is just a bit bugged out. Some puzzles, such as calling Edna to sneak by her or learning the code of the safe by looking through the telescope, are therefore rendered obsolete and unnecessary. That's why, after completing my initial playthrough on the enhanced version, I went back to the original, more primitive version, completing the game as Michael and launching the meteor into space with the car. In this version, the security seemed to come back, and to proceed I actually needed to do everything as the game expected, which made me wonder, is the standard version of the game the superior version to play? But then I realised there is another version of the game that is also available to me. That's right, I booted up my Steam copy of Double Fine's Day of the Tentacle Remaster, which just so happened to have the full Maniac Mansion enhanced version available to play without the cracked version errors. So go figure, the best way to play Maniac Mansion is to opt not to play Maniac Mansion. Weird, right? In this final playthrough for myself, I went with the combination of Dave, Wendy and Sid. Wendy was going to be my main focus on this playthrough for her abilities and getting one of the endings I hadn't received yet. And Sid? Oh look, I just really wanted to kill that hamster by putting it into the microwave. And you get an achievement for it, so fuck you, I ate sick. I even made sure Ed got his revenge against Sid by showing him the remains, who proceeded to kill Sid. It's like the circle of life, except they forgot to put in the verse about microwaving rodents and getting pulverised by weird commando guys. In this playthrough, the pitfalls of getting the stamps and opening the envelope from Sid and Razor's route still apply, although instead of sending off music, the player sends off a copy of the Meteor's memoirs. After some editing done by Wendy, impressed, the publisher sends a contract to sign on the Meteor, which just so happens to be offering an evil intergalactic oozing purple meteor once in life, and it chooses to abandon its evil goals for a more lucrative lifestyle, ending the game. Maniac Mansion is definitely one of the more sinister games I've seen in adventure gaming. With a large array of deaths and dead ends, it's one that I honestly don't think I'd ever manage to complete without the use of a walkthrough or a hint website. But despite its ill intentions to its players, Maniac Mansion is also an important video game in my opinion. The Scum Engine, in particular, is one of the most important engines, paving the way for future games in the series, such as the iconic LucasArts series, Monkey Island, and the game's sequel, Day the Tentacle. Want to make sure you don't miss out on the video for Day the Tentacle? Then make sure you don't forget to subscribe to Noir Reservoir and click that little bell down there to be kept up to date on all future Noir Reservoir videos. And if you want to help support the channel, please consider liking the video and sharing it with any point and click adventure game aficionados you think will appreciate it. And finally, why not consider following my Twitter for all the dank memes? I'm sure you won't regret it. Probably. So until next time, my friends, I'll catch you later.